Now finally, we have the Feast of Tabernacles. This happens on the 7th month, Tishri 15. It's 7 days long on the 7th month. It's also known as the Feast of Ingathering. It's also known as the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Nations. Sukkot represents tents, and for 7 days they dwell in tents or booths. It's a time of rejoicing, and like we have never seen, unless you've been involved in one of these, especially back in the old days when they had the temple in place. The temple was lit so brightly. They had up high fires. They would take the priests' robes that were no longer being used, the priestly garb, and cut them into strips. And they would use that as wicks. Up on these posts, they would fill these things with 7 gallons worth of oil. There were so many fires going. It was so bright, lit so bright, that every village in Jerusalem would receive its light. You could see the light from 20 miles away in the Mediterranean. And they said during the Feast of Tabernacles that Jerusalem was the light of the world. Things were lit up. It was more exciting than I'm sure anything I can imagine. But it's 7 days long, representing the 7 days of creation, 7,000 years. The dwelling in tents, it's representing that the earth and our bodies are temporary dwelling places. You have on the 8th day, the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, it represents new beginnings. The 8th day in creation would be after the millennium, where a new heaven and a new earth is presented. Look at Revelation chapter 21. Look at Isaiah chapter 51, verse 6. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. On this 8th day, you have the rejoicing of the Torah, being taught God's Word. The Torah, you might say, the first 5 books of the Bible, which represents a marriage contract. That's another story. But Yeshua will begin his millennial reign on this date, on Tishri 15. And we will all sit at his feet, and he will teach us the Torah. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 33, verses 1 through 4. We're going to sit at his feet, and he's going to teach us the Torah the way he knows it, like we have never seen it before. Look at John chapter 8, verse 2. We see Yeshua doing this on the 8th day of the feast. He's teaching, just like Deuteronomy 33, verses 2 and 3. But you remember how Yeshua, when they were accusing the woman of adultery, according to the Torah, the woman was not only at fault, so was the guy. Where was he? Why didn't they bring him to be stoned? They were ignoring the Torah. They were breaking the Torah. They were going by their own laws. But you remember Yeshua stooped down and he wrote with his finger on the ground. And they had just rejected him. And they were ignoring the Torah, which was also written in stone by the finger of God. But a lot of people like to wonder, what was he doing with his writing with his finger on the ground? Well, Look at Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. In fact, let's read it together. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. O Yahweh, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Now in that scene in John, they had forsaken him, and what happened? They all walked away in shame, didn't they? But catch this. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken Yahweh, the spring of living water. He was, I don't know, maybe he's writing their names in the dust, but here it is in Jeremiah. They turned away from him. And here it says, those who turn away from you will be written in the dust. So, every page of this book is about him. And there are prophecies in here untold. He fulfilled every single one of them, except for the ones that he will yet fulfill. And one thing you can rest assured about is he will fulfill the rest of them, and exactly on God's schedule. Just to clarify a little further that God has a schedule. In Revelation chapter 9, verse 15, it says, and the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. Yahweh has everything clocked out to the year, the month, the week, the day, and the hour. Now, finally, in closing, concerning the Feast of Tabernacles, which has to do with the second coming of Christ and him reigning for 1,000 years on earth during the millennial period, Yeshua was born not on December 25th, as most people know by now, I hope, but in September. And I have a teaching about the Mazzaroth, which is today commonly called the Zodiac. And in that teaching, the Mazzaroth is what Abba Father gave to Adam to teach also his plan for salvation. And in September, you have the sign of Virgo. That's the virgin and the virgin birth. And in that teaching, I say, Yeshua was born in September. That's the beginning of the Mazzaroth. There'll be a virgin birth, and it goes all the way around. It ends with Leo the lion of the tribe of Judah, the Messiah. But also, Mary and Joseph, they traveled many miles to get to Bethlehem, where Yeshua was born. And if that was in the winter, Jerusalem gets a lot of snow in the winter. It was in September, and guaranteed he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why there was no room at the inn. You had 2.5 million Jews were all coming to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. The place was packed. There was no room in the inn. And he was dressed in swaddling clothes. The original language there means to wrap with strips. These strips were the priestly garments that they had cut into strips to use as wicks for all the lamps. So Yeshua was wrapped in priestly garments at his birth, and he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles. This has been as short and a brief study as I could possibly make it. If you want to, dig in on these feasts and get a proper education, do a search here on YouTube. In the search box, type in FelixElTecnico, 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 comma, the Feasts of the Lord. And you'll get his playlist. There's quite a bit. Anyway, I hope this helps you learn to be watchful. God bless.